before we start. Do a refresh. All right. Before we start. Excellent. So this is a presentation on the CubeSat Developers Workshop, which is hosted in Cal Poly in California. Every year, we had some members go this year, including myself, and this is kind of what generally happened. So here's what I'm going to talk about today. Some general ideas going on in the space industry, the interesting presentations we saw, and then some of the more interesting vendors. I'm not going to go over context for the video because it's not really important. So there's this concept of new space. A lot of people coming into aerospace don't really know about this, or at least I didn't know about this, but I'm really in aerospace. It's basically, before new space, there was old space, which was really just called space, which was the idea that satellites were these huge monolithic government projects that cost millions and millions of dollars, and they're kind of still there today. But new space is the idea that space is becoming more commercialized. So, it's like when the first car became widely available, or really not that, when the first computers became widely available, people started buying them, and the industry kind of changed from being, super research projects to a very commercial industry, and space is kind of heading in that direction. And what that means is that there's going to be a lot more commercial off-the-shelf projects or products, COTS, and that's going to really impact the overall field and make things probably cheaper and faster produced in the coming years. So we can definitely expect to see a lot more performance as things, leave the government zone and become commercialized and add in competition. So the possible future of new space, there were a lot of presentations on obviously more CubeSats. It seems to be a lot of universities across the country and across the world actually are creating many, many CubeSats to do many, many things. They're all very interesting. Asteroid mining, it's kind of a buzzword in aerospace, I feel like right now, but probably more like asteroid prospecting would be a role for CubeSats. Mass scale space communications. So if you've not seen our video on SDR, basically the concept with mass scale communications is that you have a lot of SDR-based CubeSats that can all create dynamic communications network. It's very interesting, but kind of abstract at the same time. Space funeral services. So if you want to maybe launch yourself into space when you die, that might be available soon. I'm pretty sure there's a company already offering that. Kind of morbid, but kind of cool. And cluster and swarm missions is also one of the current buzzwords and probably the future of definitely CubeSats. So instead of launching one huge satellite with a bunch of sensors on it, you launch a bunch of small satellites that cost less and have a more distributed fail rate that can each share things. So communications clusters and sensor clusters are going to be pretty big in the coming years. I think the military had a presentation about how they were trying to basically make a net for GPS to kind of give it some more backup, because GPS isn't exactly the most powerful radio signal. And some things that I saw that new space didn't really have was there's not really a lot of open source technologies out there. If you come back to the embedded world and just kind of the hobbyist side, you've got the Arduino series that's kind of made its way into space, but not really. The Raspberry Pi, that's not really an open source hardware, but it's pretty out there. There's a lot of open source SDRs right now, especially with the RTL making SDR really popular the last couple of years. So that's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. I think there will definitely be some more open source space. There's a project called SatNogs that I found recently that I don't think I added to the presentation. But it's basically a open source way to take a Raspberry Pi and make your own ground station. And then you link it up to a distributed system, which kind of brings us into cluster and swarm mission infrastructure. So instead of sending a bunch of CubeSats out and having that as your swarm on the Earth, the idea is to have a lot of basically ground stations connected to a common infrastructure that can all contribute and pull from resources. So if you're on one side of the world and your CubeSat's on the other, you have a volunteer network that is all sharing their radio communications. So that's going to be probably pretty big in the next couple of years. And I think there were a couple people from Australia and NASA trying to set that up, but not anything formal yet. Some of the companies that were at the CubeSat Developers Workshop this year include ATK, Blue Origin, Boeing, Excalibur, Paragon, SNC, and SpaceX, and also ULA, the United Launch Alliance. There's also people from NASA and the ESA there, the European Space Agency. Some of the more interesting proposals that were there, rather than just the typical CubeSat. CubeSats are interesting, but these are the ones that stood out. Marco, this actually launched a week or less than a week after the conference this year. Marco is the first interplanetary CubeSats, that's plural. They launched 2 6U CubeSats. They're going to be used as a communications relay for the new Mars lander. And they were forecasting up to an 8 kilobit a second connection on that. So pretty much dial-up speed, but you're from Mars, so that's pretty impressive, I believe. And then the same man who wrote, or some of the same people, not the same singular person, who wrote the interplanetary CubeSats paper, Robert Stale, I believe his name, yeah. He authored another paper called, I don't remember the title, it was something about Mars drop pods, but basically in the top right here, there's my mouse pointer, you have these football-sized pods that would smack into the ground after being deployed from like a 4U CubeSat that has a backpack basically. And then they wouldn't really slam down. They'd glide down using paragliders. And then when they hit the ground, they'd spring open and a bunch of little tiny robots would basically come out. And he had some interesting concepts for that. He even had some video of him crawling around a Mars-like surface. However, he was told that it was a N-level miracle situation where N is the number of miracles required to make such a project actually work. So there's probably not something we'll see in the the near future of space exploration, but could definitely be out there in the future, especially for things like asteroid prospecting. And then Impulsion Technologies is basically creating this modular, super high efficiency ion engine they designed basically from scratch. Their entire technology is based on this little needle structure right here, which is actually very interesting. They've been developing it for 30 years. It looks very promising, but the presenter for that literally walked on stage with his lab notebook that he had filled that week and was talking about it. Very interesting to see where that'll go. It looks like they're going to be good, but they're not quite there yet. Some other the interesting vendors that were there, at least. You had all your people selling just regular, COTS parts, which are super expensive government contract parts. But then you had Kratos, who was selling SDR control interfaces. So if you've seen our video on SDR, you know that they can be used for multiple frequencies and not just one. So Kratos is basically selling a full end solution to go from like your technician's computer all the way to your satellite using a huge SDR system. I don't believe the systems are distributed yet, but is in concurrent around the world. But they do offer those services in the United States. And there's Exonabox. This is a relatively new company. They do a lot of IoT stuff. If you look on the right here, they've got basically their product line consists of these square 1.5 inch chips, 1.5 inch square. And each one has a different module on it. This one here is a GPS antenna. This one here, I think, is an Arduino-like system. This one here is a power board. This one here is a display. And if you look on these connectors, they just snap together. You've got your power connectors right here and then an I2C network right there. And those are very handy, especially for, less engineering inclined people. So if you have, say, a high school group that you wanted to educate in satellite technologies, this would be a very easy way to show them how everything fits together. Or even like a introductory college course. These are very clean pieces. That is, all the slides I had for this one. All right, thank you for watching.